capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number, or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know, Zach.
It's a tough one. I
It's
know,
really hard.
and maybe comparing numbers is not Jeremy Strong's. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. So tonight, I thought I'd do something a little bit different. I don't tend to talk about other content creators all that much, but from time to time, I do like to dabble in the reaction, especially when it is some pretty outrageous right-wing takes. So in my timeline, for whatever reason, PragerU has popped up, and I decided to follow them to see the kind of ridiculousness that they come up with. This is on Facebook, by the way. And they did not disappoint in that regard. Recently, they came up with this video. I'll bring it up right now. And the title is America Didn't Become Wealthy Because of Slavery. So I thought we would go through this video, and it's a pretty short one. It's only 2 minutes, or actually it might be even less than that. Yeah, almost exactly 2 minutes. So I thought we'd go through it one time. Just let it run so you don't think that I am being uncharitable or breaking things up so that I can break it down. So we'll let it go through one time without commentary, and then we'll go back through again one more. Yeah, right. Yeah, you'll never believe the reasons that Dennis comes up with for these astounding facts. So anyway, we'll go through it one time, and we will come back through a second time, pausing with each claim that Dennis makes, and we'll take a little bit deeper dive into those claims to see if they hold up to the most basic of Googling scrutiny. So let's start right now. Oh, you know what? I don't have any captions up right now. I should get those up. So I highly encourage any leftist video creator or live streamer out there, or if you know of any of such folk, I encourage you very much to go check out facebook.com/leftsignalboosttv. We are starting, or we have already started. We are building a live stream video creator. Thanks for the follows, Zero Logic Pog and Leapik. Anyway, we're building a live streamer and video content creator collective. We already have 4 members. There's myself, Bread Theory. We have For We Are Many, we have the Poor Pearls Almanac, and most recently, The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, which had a really great show recently, this last Friday. They had a number of big people from LeftTube. They had Ben Burgess, Anarch, Some Random Geek, and a few other people on to discuss left unity. It was a really great discussion. If you are into people articulating ideas and playing off each other's ideas without it devolving into the typical debate blood sports, then that's definitely something you should go check out. But if you go over to Left Signal Boost TV on Facebook, you can find that video as well as many others. We're going live pretty much every day at this rate, so it's been a real great place. It's like your one location where you can get a whole lot of content day after day. All right, but let's get into Dennis Prager's big brain takes. Let's see.
Left will say,
oh, I wonder if there are closed captionings that I can turn on. I had to find this on YouTube. I could not find the version on Facebook, I should say. I could not find the version on YouTube. I don't know if such a version exists yet, if it was taken off YouTube, what happened to it. Judging by his face, this looks like a little bit older, a less recent Dennis Prager video. because since having COVID, he's slimmed down a lot and he's slurring his speech a lot more lately. So I have a feeling they recycled this from somewhere. Maybe it was only on PragerU.com, but whatever. I cannot find any closed captionings. I do apologize for that. But if you do need closed captionings for this, the best place to go is either that Facebook site that I mentioned, facebook.com/leftsignalboosttv, or you can go over to facebook.com/breadtheory, all one word without an underscore. And you can watch from either of those sites, and it will auto-generate the captions for you. So I apologize, but that's the best I can do right now. Anyway, let's get into the video.
America was built on slavery. It was built by slaves. That's their claim. There's virtually no truth to it. Number one, the half of America that had slaves was the poorer half, much poorer than the North. The South was much economically poorer. So if slavery made wealth, it made wealthy individuals, but if it made society wealthy, the South would have been richer than the North. The North didn't have slavery.
It's flawless
The South
logic.
did. The South was poor. The North was rich, comparatively speaking, obviously. That's pretty powerful, no? How about this? This is even more powerful. If slavery made countries rich, Brazil would be the richest country in the Western Hemisphere. Brazil had about, 10 times as many slaves as the United States. 8 times, 5 times, I don't know exactly.
We pull it out
we
of
in the
thin air, it
United
doesn't
States
matter.
brought 350,000, 360,000 across the Atlantic as slaves. They had, 8 million, 7 million. I mean, it's incredible how many more times slaves, how many more slaves and more time slaves, exponentially more than the United States. But Brazil's a poor country relative to the United States. Why is that? If slaves make rich countries, so there's no truth to the claim that slavery built America. It's just not true. This doesn't deny the horrors of slavery, obviously. One of the horrors of slavery, ironically, is not just what it does to slaves, what it does to the society. It keeps it backwards. It hurts the slaves, number one, and it hurts society, number two.
So there you have it. There's an ironclad defense of how the North was what. Yeah. Okay. So let's break down his claim overall. He's getting at a version of the idea that somehow U.S. chattel slavery was inevitable to fall because capitalism is just such a better economic system. It produces such better results that eventually it would have been outcompeted anyway. This is a claim that comes up, seems like maybe once a decade. Someone trundles it back out and tries to say that it's not that it was a better economic system. It's that it was just done through just pure cruelty. There was no other reason to have slaves. It's just cruelty and bigotry, and that's it. And if we had just been able to eliminate that, well, then capitalism would have taken over eventually. And it's a completely bogus claim. And we're going to find out just how bogus that is. So let's look at his first claim that he makes.
Left will say America was built on slavery. It was built by slaves. That's their claim. There's virtually no truth to it. Number one.
Okay, so there's no truth to the fact that America was built by slaves. It's hard to even know where to begin with such an outrageous counter to that idea that America was somehow not built by slaves. We've had slaves since before America was America. They were responsible for most agricultural production. The South was the agricultural powerhouse of the country. That's where most of the raw goods came from, was the South. And by and large, agricultural workers were slaves. So just that fact alone totally disproves the idea that America was not built by slaves. Slaves literally built things like the U.S. Capitol building. I believe they built the White House as well. They were employed in all sorts of ways in the North and the South, because in the beginning of America, slavery was still legal in the North. It was not as widespread, and we'll get to the reasons why in a moment, but absolutely untrue. The claim that Dennis is making that slavery did not build the U.S. Now you could say that intellectually, not free men directed all the building of the U.S., but that's not the same as actually building it. That's not the same as doing the work yourself. But this comes from his capitalist mindset that the only ownership that is worthy of defending is intellectual ownership of something. You own the capital that buys the people or the machines, and therefore you own the product of whatever comes out of that at the other end. It doesn't matter if you did the labor yourself. It doesn't matter if you employed other people to do the labor. It doesn't matter if you had slaves to do the labor. You still own the product of that. So in a very convoluted way, you could say that you built it, but I don't agree with that one bit. So there's claim one. Moving on.
The half of America that had slaves was the poorer half.
That is absolutely false, and we're going to start in with some of the debunks. There's no way that shakes out at all. Let's see. Let me find that one. I have a few articles pulled up here. Okay. Oh, let me find that one again. Oh man. Not that one. And one of these here, it talks about the average wage or the average wealth of Northerners and Southerners. So I'm going to try and find that one again. Nope, not that one either. Where was it? Anyway. Shoot. I had the statistic all ready to go, and now I'm having trouble finding it once again. But anyway, we'll look at some other stats first. So we'll move on in the video once more, and we'll come back to that again when I find it once more.
Much poorer than the North. The South was much economically poorer.
But that's not okay. So I'll just give you the stat, and then I'll find the actual statistic when I can go back through these documents here. But they talked about in 1860 the average wealth of a Northerner versus the average wealth of a Southerner. Let me see if I can just search for the article again. In 1860. So this is right around the Civil War time. So the wealth of the average Northerner in 1860 was $546.24. Of the average free Southerner, this is all free Southerners. So this is excluding slaves, of course, but all free Southerners, the average wealth was $1,042, almost twice the wealth. Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. We'll pull it up so that I can show you that stat directly. So you don't think I'm just pulling it out of thin air, as Dennis is so eager to do. So here we go. So here's the highlighted part. The extreme poverty characteristic of the region depicted by Olmsted, this is Frederick Law Olmsted, and Cairns, I believe it's Frederick Law Olmsted. Anyway, these researchers who were studying wealth in the South at the time found that that wealth was somewhat more prevalent in the South than in the North. The southern states were far wealthier on a per capita basis, an order of 2 to 1. The wealth on average, the wealth of the average Northerner in 1860 was $546.24, and of the average free Southerner, $1,042.74. So even that overall statistic. Now he tried to hide that in vague gesturing, so that you would think that overall the South had had less wealth than the North. But you also have to look at the population. And if you look at the population, let's see, I think this one also has a population stat. We'll bring that one up too. All right, we'll just search for that one again. In fact, we'll back up and we'll search. Let's look up the average population, or the population in North and South. In 1860. Here we go. Okay. So here we have some cultural differences before the war. According to the 1860 census, the U.S. population was about 31 million. In 1860, the South had about 8 million white people, or freed people, compared to about 20 million in the North. So more than double the population in the North. So while it may be true that overall there was more wealth in the North, even that I find hard to believe if the average per capita wealth, well, but just because of extra population, that could be true. Just as, overall large cities have, per capita a lot more of a lot of things. They have, um, per capita a lot more police officers, for example, than in rural areas. The South was very rural. It was very undeveloped at that point. And so, of course, it had a lower population and a lower overall bit of wealth, or sum of wealth. So he's trying to hide it in that statistic. But if you look at the average per capita, again, it's no comparison at all. The South, on average, people were twice as wealthy as in the North. Now, those statistics, too, are greatly skewed by plantation owners who had the bulk of the wealth far and away above all other freed whites. We can look at another tab right here. Actually, you know what? Let's not get into that yet. Let's go ahead and continue on in the video. And then we'll relate that to another claim that he makes. Okay.
So if slavery made wealth, it made wealthy individuals. But if it made society wealthy, the South would have been richer than the North. The North didn't have slavery. The South did. The South was poor. The North was rich. Comparatively speaking, obviously. That's pretty powerful, no? How about this? This is even more powerful. If slavery made countries rich, Brazil would be the richest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Now, this one here, he doesn't list a time frame for that. He doesn't say during slavery, but it doesn't really matter because, again, we're talking about how much wealth it can make for the people that practice it versus capitalism. These are two different forms of economic productivity. In a slave state, there is no worker-owner contract. You don't, if you're a slave and you don't like your master, you don't get to just choose a different master. That's a big difference between slavery and capitalism. In capitalism, there's the worker-owner contract. You can negotiate terms. You can leave your employer if you don't feel satisfied and try and find employment elsewhere. That's not to say whether or not that's a good system overall, or whether it tends to work out that way, that you can just find something better by getting a different employer. It's just stating the simple differences between the two systems. So again, you could compare it to Brazil, which had more more slaves than the U.S., but it doesn't really matter because saying his claim is America didn't become wealthy because of slavery. So to only look at how overall slavery makes a society wealthy versus individuals, it's kind of disingenuous. It doesn't quite get at which economic system is more profitable, because again, he's doing a version of slavery would have declined naturally anyway, and that's just not the case. There's a reason it took a war to end slavery in the U.S. So let's see. Let's. Oh, is what frozen? Oh, is Dennis frozen? Yeah, I just paused it for a second. I think so. I don't think I'm offline or anything. So yeah, Dennis is just frozen for them because we're going point by point. It's a very short video. So the question is, does slavery produce wealth? And for the people that employ or the people that use slaves, yeah, pretty obviously. And I think another tab that I had found, another source, is appropriate here to debunk that. Let's see. Which was the one that I wanted to use? I think it was the digital history one. Let's take a look at that one. Okay. So this is talking about the South's economy. This is a digital history uh.edu. I'll link it right now so you can all take a look. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying there, James. So here's the article. You can take a look for yourself. Let's just read through this a little bit. Although slavery was highly profitable, it had a negative impact on the Southern economy overall. Now, overall is my addition, but that's what it means. It impeded the development of industry in cities and contributed to high debts, soil exhaustion, and a lack of technological innovation. The philosopher and poet Ralph Waldo Emerson said that slavery is no scholar, no improver. It does not love the whistle of the railroad. It does not love the newspaper, the mailbag, a college, a book, a preacher who has the absurd whim of saying that he thinks. It does not increase the white population. It does not improve the soil. Everything goes to decay. This appears to be a large element of truth in Emerson. There appears to be a large element of truth in Emerson's observations. The South, like other slave societies, did not develop urban centers for commerce, finance, industry on a scale equal to those found in the North. Virginia's largest city, Richmond, had a population of just 15,000 in 1850. That same year, Wilmington, North Carolina's largest city, had only 7,264 inhabitants. While Natchez and Vicksburg, the two largest cities in Mississippi, had fewer than 3,000 white inhabitants. Southern cities were small because they failed to develop diversified economies, because they didn't have to, right? It was so incredibly profitable and so incredibly, repeatable, these efforts, generation after generation, that they didn't have to rely on the constant influx of cheap labor from overseas as the North did. So unlike the cities of the North, southern cities rarely became processing or finishing centers, and southern ports rarely engaged in international trade. The primary functions were to market and transport cotton or other agricultural crops, supply local planters and farmers with such necessities as agricultural implements, and to produce a small number of manufactured goods, such as cotton gins needed by farmers. An overemphasis on slave-based agriculture led Southerners to neglect industry and transportation improvements. As a result, manufacturing and transportation lagged far behind in comparison to the North. In 1860, the North had approximately 1.3 million industrial workers, whereas the South had 110,000, and Northern factories manufactured 9/10 of the industrial goods produced in the United States. And that's another important fact. Well, the South's economy was largely agrarian based, so they were producing things. rather than finishing products. Of course, first order goods, as you take them out of the ground, whether it be a mined product or an agricultural product, overall are less expensive. They garner a lower price. Finished products, on the other hand, produce a higher price, so you get a bigger return on that. But if you're a plantation owner, you don't really care, because you have dozens, hundreds of people that are working for you for free. All you have to do is provide them a little bit of food and some really basic shelter, and you can take the entire product of their labor for yourself. So it's a very low cost way to keep things going. So if you're a southern plantation owner, what does it matter to you if there are as many finished goods? You can just get them back from the north. You have plenty of money on hand that you can purchase whatever goods you want from wherever you need to get them from. You don't need to have all these sites of industry if you're sitting on top of everything. If you're sitting on top of a mound of money created by people that have no ability to stop working for you, whose uh, um, offspring have no ability to stop working for you. So for those people, there's not really an incentive to innovate, to have large factories, to have much of anything, and so consequently, there wasn't that much. It took these cities a long time to build up into the cities they are today. So there's they talk about the railroads were below the standard in the north. Because of high tax rates and personal debt, southern states kept taxation and government spending at much lower levels than did the states of the north. That sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? And again, it's because if you have so much money, what incentive do you have to give it away to other less fortunate people? It's not as though having higher taxes would have helped the slaves at all. It's not as though the slaves could even lobby their government to get better working conditions or anything, the way that workers in the north could. So there's no incentive for the people, for the powerful, to allow higher tax rates or to have higher standards of living for anyone but themselves. There's just more about trade here. Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, 20% of all Southern white adults could not read or write. So this is a product of just not caring about the rest of the society that you live in, because things are very good for the very few. While the illiteracy rate in New England was less than half of 1%. So here's the key part. Because large slaveholders owned most of the region's slaves, wealth was more stratified. Excuse me. Wealth was more stratified in the north, than in the deep south. The middle class held a relatively small proportion of the region's prosperity, while wealthy planters owned a very significant portion of the productive land and slave labor. In 1850, 17% of the farming population held 2/3 of all the acres in the rich cotton growing regions in the South. So yeah, for the people that are engaged in slavery, it is massively more profitable than for those that were engaging in capitalism in the North. So you still had rich people in the North, rich capitalists who own the mills, the shops that the goods were sold in, so on and so forth. There was a lot more commerce and industry happening up there. But overall, the wealthiest people were these large plantation owners. So there's that. But then there's also the fact that so much of the goods for the North, in fact, I would wager to say the majority of the goods that the North used in their factories to finish these products that they could then sell came from the South. So while it's not directly slaves making that stuff in the factories, it's still because of slave labor. it is still dependent on slave labor, much as capitalism is still very much dependent on slave labor and near slave conditions around the world. When slavery was outlawed here, rich capitalists looking to keep their margins down had to start looking elsewhere. A lot of people actually moved down to Brazil because it was one of the last countries in the world to continue slavery going after the U.S. finally outlawed it. In fact, there are places in Brazil now that still celebrate a like Confederate History Day. I think it was I don't know if it was the start of the Civil War or what significant date it was, but there are still places that celebrate the U.S. Confederacy because of that. That's how much the legacy of slavery didn't just end in the United States finally outlawing slavery. Okay. So even here's another statistic. During the 1850s, the percentage of total white population owning slaves declined significantly. So it was the large landowners that were continuously buying up more and more. As we see a lot with capitalism, the large, powerful producers can get to a point where all they have to do is suck up the excess, or suck up the larger, the smaller producers in their same field, and eventually there's nothing that can really stop them. They basically are starting to create monopoly power. So even in a very profitable system such as slavery, that still exists. Okay, back to the video. Yeah, it's free wealth. Absolutely. So he never actually, you'll notice that in this video, he never actually makes a point. He only vaguely gestures at the idea that somehow capitalism is just a superior system, but he never comes out and says it. And I mean, it's probably in large part due to the fact that that's not what he's claiming is not true. It's not as though slavery was inevitable to fail. But okay, so he's talking about Brazil. Let's get past the Brazil point. We'll move on to his next one.
Brazil had about, I don't know, 10 times as many slaves as the United States? 8 times? 5 times?
He's all over the place. So let's quickly fact check that. Brazil slave population. He doesn't give a time frame, so we'll just go with 1860. So 10 million in 1872. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. The total population was 10 million and 15% were slaves. Well, that's not even 5 million. Wait a minute. So it sounds like he's completely pulling this fact out of his arse. Look at the highest point. So from the time period of 1501 to 1866, 5 million enslaved people from Africa were imported to Brazil. Now, of course, they're going to perhaps multiply over those generations. Let's see if we can find out what the slave population was at its height. Yeah, okay, so Portugal changes in 17th century. Okay. Let's see if we can find. Okay, so Brazilian-born slaves. Maybe we can look at a world slave population overview. I'm finding statistics that don't even match that very basic claim that Dennis made. Biggest slave states. I'm not finding any quick facts about that. But it sounds like he's way overestimated how many slaves there were in Brazil, because the entire population of 1860 was 10 million, and only 15% were slaves, which is 1.5 million. So again, he's just, I guess that's the basic fact of that part of it, is he's just absolutely wrong. So even when he's trying to say that somehow Brazil should have been the largest economy, again, for the people that engaged in slavery, it was the most profitable economy. I'm pretty confident in saying that the same would be true in Brazil as it was in the US. For slave owners, it's going to be the best system to generate wealth. Because if you think about it, just imagine, just imagine yourself as a worker. If slavery was legal right now, and you could somehow afford to have a slave, you could get them to come to work with you, and right away you'd be doubling your income. Now, imagine what you could do with double your income. You could probably afford to rent or buy a place that had an extra bedroom. You could probably afford a couple $100 a month in groceries. And you could probably even afford separate transportation. Although if they were coming to work with you, then you wouldn't even have to factor in extra transportation. So very minimal costs for a very huge return. Now, of course, you'd have to not have any ethical qualms about owning another human being. But if you got past that hurdle, of course, even for workers, it would be hugely profitable to be able to just take all of what another person earns for yourself, and them to have no rights. Like, you know, so just on its face, the idea that somehow capitalism is just a more profitable system is not true. There's absolutely no reason. Well, we'll get into more of it after we get through the video again.
I don't know exactly. We in the United States brought 350,000, 360,000 across the Atlantic as slaves.
Of course, they multiplied then too. That was not the height of U.S. slave population. Let's look up that statistic. So again, he's obscuring facts by saying this is how much we brought from Africa, as though that was the total of it at the time. So let's look at the height of U.S. slave population. Okay. So in 1840, the slave population reached its peak of nearly 60,000 people. Okay. Maybe we can find the same statistic for Brazil too, just to compare it, because I don't know, that nonsense fact that he threw out there just keeps sticking with me. Yeah. Slave population in Brazil. Okay. I'm not getting clear stats on that, but it did say that in 1860 there was about 1.5 million. So that is many times more than 60,000. That's not every slave either that lived and died in the US, but regardless, we can probably safely assume that there were more slaves, many times more, in Brazil than there were in the US. But again, that has nothing to do with whether or not capitalism could have built those countries better. It has much more to do with the fact that those are much more profitable systems. So Caitlin asks, didn't this D-head speak at CPAC? Probably so. He's kind of like everyone's. The right views him as kind of the lovable grandpa. dispensing pearls of wisdom to a dumb and misguided younger generation. And he's worked with many of the right-wing ghouls. We'll look at a few more PragerU videos after this one. But let's get to the end of this, because I had a couple more thoughts about this before we close out.
They had, I don't know, 8 million, 7 million. I mean, it's incredible how many more times slaves, how many more slaves and more time slaves, exponentially more than the United States. But Brazil's a poor country relative to the United States.
Is now?
Why is that? If slaves make rich countries, so there's no truth to the claim that slavery built America. It's just not true. This doesn't deny the horrors of slavery, obviously.
It makes it seem as though, the way he's framing it, as though slavery was only something that people do to be cruel and bigoted towards one another. But when it comes down to it, it's not the way that we improve societies as a whole. And this is just not true. We've gone through it already, but we'll run through it again. So yes, the average Southerner had more wealth than the average free Northerner. Free Northerner and free Southerner during 1860, 2 times more on average for free Southerners in terms of wealth. So yes, it does generate a tremendous amount of wealth. The major difference between the North and South was the types of economic activity that they focused on. If you're using if you're an agrarian society, and the wealthiest people have bought up most of the land, most of the good land for growing their crops on and extracting money through slavery, then they personally don't have much of an incentive to give up any of that land in order to allow cities to grow, in order to spark manufacture. And in the North, the vast majority of products that they were using to grow their capitalist businesses, so this is even after the time that slavery was abolished, the vast majority of the products were coming from slave states. So still, because of slavery, the slavery was also responsible for the wealth of the North. Without all of the agricultural products from the South, it would be very hard for the North to be prosperous. They would have to be making their own agricultural products to turn into goods. And cotton, among other, and tobacco, don't do as well in the North. So the two cash crops that were really king in the South were crops in the South for a reason. And those two things, I mean, tobacco, of course, you have the vice element of it. It's a product that became very popular, especially in Europe. So the US became one of the biggest producers of tobacco, with all of its addictive properties. So there's that. That makes it a really good cash crop. Then you have cotton, which can be turned into all sorts of textiles, not just clothing, but drapery. It can be used in other industrial processes. It can be used for all sorts of things, for sails, for the dominant forms of transportation, although we were moving into the steam age at this time. But beyond that point, so again, the North is rich because of slavery, just less directly. So his entire claim is bogus. Yeah, I had one more point I wanted to make, but it's not coming to me, so we'll just run out the video.
One of the horrors of slavery, ironically, is not just what it does to slaves, what it does to the society. It keeps it backwards.
In that, he has half a point, because as we were looking at earlier, it does hold back the development of cities, but that's just because you didn't need to, right? And there's another reason that the North was able to rely on manufacturing, and again, when you say making society rich, most of the people in the North were not rich either. Look, they had over twice the population, but on average, they had half the wealth per person. how could that possibly be if all of this manufacturing is happening in the North? All these refined goods are being produced. It's because at that time, capitalism was virtually unregulated. There was taxation, of course. There were laws that protected capital owners, but for workers, there were virtually no rights. I'm reading right now the book The Jungle. I'll leave a link to that one too. I think there's a LibriVox version of that book. Let me just look it up real quick. But even though it is a fiction book or a fictional account, it really illustrates what capitalism is, what naked capitalism is, when there are virtually no protections for the workers. I believe there is a LibriVox version. So here's a free audiobook version of that one. Cool. So I'll leave a link to that one. It's by Upton Sinclair. It's a classic. A lot of people have read it in school, but having read it now, after learning all these things about leftist ideas, it is pretty obvious that unchecked capitalism is, as he put it, basically the law of the jungle. It is dog eat dog. It's kill or be killed. And these factories, I mean, there's a pretty obvious reason that Upton Sinclair chose to set it in the stockyards of Chicago. And he went to such great lengths to describe all of the bodies of cattle that went through the processing and were just ground down. And he's not subtle about it. It's because that's the same thing that happened to the people, the workers themselves. They were ground down little by little. That's what naked capitalism does. And that was what was occurring in the North. So that's why the average person had so little money, because there were tons of factory workers. There were tons of very cheap laborers. And because New York and Boston were the main points of entry into the country, I think Boston probably was still at that time a point of entry. But anyway, because the Northeast was the main point of entry into the country, they had constant influx of new immigrants who were poor and desperate and had been given this idea that the U.S. was the land of opportunity, and all you had to do was walk into a nearest store, and they would set you up with a job, and you'd live like a king, and all this stuff. But none of that was true, and they could just pit these teeming poor masses against one another for factory work. And as soon as they'd use up one person, they'd put another person on the line. In the jungle, they talked about how routinely people would fall into like the rendering vat or something like that, and they would end up as you know a sausage or a some sort of animal product. And it's just how it happened. And then work would keep on going. Wasn't a big deal to the owners. So that's what's occurring in the North at this time. This time that he is trying to show the wonders of capitalism and how it enriches a nation. Well, for most people, it did not enrich them. Because there was all this industry, though, there was opportunity for a middle class to form. The small business owners, the people that serviced the workers. People that ran saloons, people that did secondary functions or were middle management in these large companies. There was actually opportunity for that. And in the South, the only reason it didn't have that was because they didn't need to. You have an army of slaves. But there's no reason that the North couldn't have been run the same way. And in fact, early on, we know there were plenty of slaves. That's where slavery first came, was in the North. So this idea that somehow his capitalist economy is completely incompatible with slavery, one, is just on its face false. Within the same country, slave products were being used by capitalists to profit even more. And for another, if it were not for the constant influx of workers, they certainly could have used slaves instead in all these factories to do those very same things. The workers themselves didn't live in much better conditions on average than a slave. you know, crowded together in boarding houses and tenements, no sanitation, no running water necessarily, certainly no electricity at this time. Food that was constantly adulterated because there were no food standards. On and on and on. The it's not as though the picture of life in the North was so much greater and so much nobler because they relied primarily on capitalism rather than slavery for the workers themselves. Again, for the products, they did rely on slavery. All right, let's move on to something different. I'm not sure if we want to stay in the Facebook PragerU or if we want to move on to YouTube. Because I was looking at YouTube, the
It
PragerU.
hurts. It hurts the slaves' number.
I was looking at the PragerU YouTube channel, and it's been dying. In fact, why don't we bring that up? If you look at the most watched videos from PragerU, it's almost all from 2 years ago, 5 years ago. They are not getting the views nearly at the same rate as they used to be. Let's bring that up so we can look at this PragerU by views. Their most viewed video ever with 18 million views, which, hey, we could probably go through a few of these. A lot of these are pretty short. That's kind of PragerU's MO, is to give you a little factoid soundbite that you can then repeat to your liberal friends and sound really smart and condescending without ever actually thinking about anything or getting a single fact right. But anyway, we can go through a few of these, but their most viewed one was from 3 years ago. Their second most viewed one was from 7 years ago, 5 years, 4 years, 5 years, 2 years. You have to go until, where is it? I'm not even seeing one that was within the last year. 7 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 months ago. You have to go to tier 4 of their uploads before you get to one that is within the last year in terms of their most viewed videos. So luckily they are dying as a channel, but they make a pretty good foil for the left because their ideas are just so dumb and so easily to debunk. It really just takes a little bit of Googling. So James says, like immigrants worked in West Virginia coal mines back in the day. Absolutely. Yeah, they ground through all those workers in West Virginia. No problem. But because of automation and because of just coal mines reducing their output, they are no longer needed as much. And now that's one big reason why states like West Virginia are in such a crisis for jobs. West Virginia, I believe, is still the poorest state in the nation. They are treated by certain non-governmental organizations as though they are a third world country in terms of what they need. They have, I think there's a day every year where like dentists and doctors will come into these small, very remote West Virginia towns and like help fix up people's teeth and give them, medical care because that's the only time that they're able to get it. Yeah, they have been left behind like no other state. It is really tragic. Yeah, it's hard to stop clinging to old ideas because at one time coal was king in West Virginia. It did well, relatively speaking. There were a lot of jobs that did pay. I'm not going to say that they were ever paid well. Workers in America are almost never paid well, especially the more difficult and backbreaking the work is. Pretty much you can be guaranteed that the lower the pay rate is going to be and the faster they're just going to chew through you and take on a new worker as soon as you are broken. But yeah, it's sad. The coal is just not going to regenerate itself, and gains in coal extraction are not just going to reverse themselves and go back to, hand picks and kerosene lanterns in the dark with your fellow coal miners. That's just never going to happen. There are now more solar jobs in the United States jobs to do with solar power than there are to do with coal. It's pretty sad for them, but they need something different. All right. I think I missed a comment back there. Oh, so earlier James had said this dude reminds me of a guy who was asked about slavery and he called it a hoax and fake news. Yeah, pretty much. And that's what they want. They don't want to ever feel bad about the past or the present of the United States. They want to shine it up and make it look like it was a lot better than it was. That's part of the way that they keep people believing all of their garbage and ultimately not questioning capitalism, because it's worked really well for Dennis Prager and people like him. So of course they want to keep that system going at all costs. Yeah, I don't think I've ever been. I think I've been maybe to a small corner of West Virginia, but I haven't really explored the state. But from what I've heard, it's an incredibly gorgeous bit of the country, very remote, but also really just pristine. Well, I guess you wouldn't say pristine necessarily, since a lot of it has been damaged by coal, but a lot of really beautiful natural areas. I would like to visit it sometime, for sure. Okay, let's go back to PragerU. We'll take a look at left or liberal. This should be a fun one. I haven't looked at this one yet, so I have not prepared any notes or anything like that. But as we saw, with almost all PragerU videos, they're defeated by a quick Google search. So we will do that as we look at PragerU's left or liberal. Oh boy.
What's the difference between a liberal and a leftist? This question stumps most people because they think liberal and left are essentially the same, but they're not.
Oops, sorry. Let me just move up the closed captioning so you can see it.
In
behind the
fact,
banner.
liberalism and leftism have almost nothing in common, but the left has appropriated the word liberal so effectively, almost everyone, liberals, leftists, and conservatives, thinks they are synonymous.
What? This I have no idea what kind of angle he's going to play this one on. The wait, what did he just say? Whoops. Boy, I'm going to drop everything at once. That's a good way to proceed. I'm going to have to run that one back a second because I'm not even sure what kind of claim he's making here. He said something about how he said liberals have co-opted the left. Let's go back. They have nothing in common. We'll take it from there.
But the left has appropriated the word liberal.
The left has appropriated the word liberal so effectively almost ever. Oh, so is he going to go with like a classic liberal sort of take? I think so.
So effectively, almost everyone, liberals, leftists, and conservatives, thinks they are synonymous. But they're not. Let me offer you 6 examples.
Oh, 6 of
1,
them, huh?
Race. This is probably the most obvious difference between liberal and left. The liberal position on race has always been A, the color of a person's skin is insignificant, and B, those who believe race is significant are racists.
Okay. So that's how we're going to play it. So what he's conflating here is the idea that the fact that people, it's the one Martin Luther King Jr. quote that everyone likes to trundle out during Black History Month, that people should not be judged by the color of their skin, by the content of the character. And as an absolute statement, sure, yes, that's true. People should not be judged that way. But then he's acting as though if you then say, hey, look at those people, they're being judged by the color of their skin, not the content of their character, that because you're pointing out a racial disparity, that you are then being racist. Okay, keeping on.
Meanwhile, the left believes the very opposite.
Oh,
to the left, it's the liberal attitude toward race. It's unimportant. That is racist. That's why the University of California officially lists the statement, there is only one race, the human race, as racist. And liberals have always been passionately committed.
Okay, well, of course, there's not. Let's look down. Let's see if he actually cites any facts here instead of just badly interpreting something he saw somewhere. I have no way of debunking this claim because I'm not really sure where the heck he got it from. So, apparently, the what do you say, the University of California, which just the entire university system, was it UCLA? Was it the whole system? What was the context?
University of California
We're not going to get that
officially
part.
lists the statement, "There is only one race, the human race," as racist, and liberals have always been passionate.
I mean, if you were to just say, "Hey, quit treating me that way, quit being racist," and you were a non-white person, and you as a white person, and then a white person said, "Well, hey, there's only one race, the human race. So shut up, you're not being oppressed." Well, sure, that would be racist because that's ignoring racism. Ignoring racism is in fact racist. I know that's a bold claim, but I'm prepared to defend it.
Committed to racial integration, while the left is increasingly committed to racial segregation, such as all black dormitories.
Okay. This is a very difficult concept for even some people who claim themselves on the left to understand. In this sort of a situation, we have an all black dormitory. It is not to uh, it is not for the reason that segregation, you think segregation is great, that you want white people over here and black people over there. It is something that black students can then opt into if they want to have a reprieve from the racism that they may experience on campus on a normal basis. So, and that is always the case, whether at my college, there was the women's center. And I had some people I knew who got really upset and they're like, why is there not a men's center? What, well, only women's issues count and stuff like that. Just no. It is a center that recognizes that the struggles of a particular minority, in this case, it was women, but in the example he gave, it was black students. The struggles that they face are unique to them, and it gives them a space to, strategize with other people of their own minority status about how to combat that. And it also just gives them a shelter where they don't have to feel that they're constantly, um, you know, at any moment someone might come by and say or do something really horrible because of their minority status. The same would be true of an LGBTQIA dormitory. Or I mean, there was the GLBTQ center in my school as well. That's not so that they could have a place to feel superior or to separate themselves out because, straights and non-straights shouldn't mix or anything like that. It was so they have a place to gain mutual support and solidarity, a place where they could go where people understood their struggles, and a place where they could go which would be a shelter from a world that doesn't view them very well. I mean, dating myself here, but when I was doing my undergraduate, this was before uh, gay marriage was legalized in the United States, so they were actively being persecuted at that time as well. Much more so than, and it's not to say that they're not today, but legally they were being discriminated against in a very, basic way. They were not allowed to marry. So they had good reason to want to organize and work together. The same could be true of a black dormitory, especially if you're coming from, college can be a scary experience to begin with. It can be very helpful to be able to connect up with people that understand where you're coming from, or that at least share your same sort of struggles. Absolutely ridiculous. But there's still leftists that don't understand this sort of thing. Like, they hear the word black nationalism, they think, oh, it's got to be the same as white nationalism. Somehow they usually understand that the term black power is not at all the same as someone saying white power. But when it comes to things like nationalism or even separatism, that can be a tricky concept. There was the whole debate between Vaush, uh, our goodest boy Valshawa, and Professor Flowers, who she stated from the beginning, and has stated in all her videos, that she herself does not believe in separatism, in racial separatism, but she can understand where certain separatist movements are coming from when they just want a place to be away from constant discrimination. And if that's the place they're coming from, that's a fundamentally different place than white separatists who just fear degeneration or impurity that comes from mixing with the non-white people. That's a fundamentally a different sort of statement, fundamentally a different sort of concept. So even if you disagree with that as a strategy, it's important to at least understand where these sorts of people are coming from who may adhere to that. And just because you hear it applied one way and it's obviously racist, and another way, you shouldn't assume that both are inherently coming from the same point of view or for the same ends. So James says, don't judge someone by the tone of their skin. Judge them because they are a douchebag or not a douchebag. Yeah, that's a pretty good way to do it. Anyway, let's continue on. This huge brain discussion of the difference between left and liberal.
Dormitories and separate black graduations at universities. 2.
Again, let's look down. Oh, yeah, no stats on that. So we have this is how they this is their MO basically. Is they throw a lot of factoids at you. They don't cite it anywhere. There's nothing more here. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, look. There's stuff to join PragerU with your iPhone and Android. There's a Pragerpedia app. Oh. We may have to look at that sometime, although I cringe just thinking about what's on there. So yeah, they list the different segments, but they don't have any links to any sort of information. So there's no way to fact check them. And basically their target audience is people that either don't think about politics, that they can just kind of, trick into believing what they believe, or people that already agree with them. So I guess in either case, you're either, you have no frame of reference, so you wouldn't even know what to do if there was. You're not likely to look at any links they have, or you just don't care and you just want someone to tell you you're right. So either case, I guess, backing up your so-called facts are not important. But let's look at number 2.
Capitalism. Liberals have always been pro-capitalism because liberals are committed to free enterprise and because they know capitalism is the only way to lift great numbers of people.
Oh, I thought he was going to make an entirely true statement there for a second. Yes, liberals love capitalism. That is actually something. So he got half of this right. Is this his only point?
Out of poverty.
Nope. Yep, that's his only point. So let's move it back.
Liberals have always been pro-capitalism because liberals are committed to free enterprise and because they know capitalism is the only way to lift.
The only way to lift a lot of people out of poverty. So this first point, free enterprise, yes. Liberals love capitalism. That is what separates Democrats, even progressive Democrats, from people on the left. That's just true. If you are on the left, you at least do not consider capitalism to be the highest and best form of economic activity that humanity can achieve. You believe that we can do better for a whole lot more people. Now, this part, that they recognize that is the only way to lift people out of poverty. Well, they may believe that, but that's certainly not true. The USSR lifted millions of people out of poverty. Especially at the beginning, it'd be hard to call them a capitalist state. China, even if you say that today they are state capitalists by and large, they weren't when they lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty. Cuba lifted tons of people out of poverty. So that's a ridiculous notion that it's the only way. Liberals may believe that. That may be why they stick with capitalism. But again, it's just not true.
Great numbers of people out of poverty. It is true that liberals want government to play a bigger role.
Whoops. Oops. Shoot. Sorry. I accidentally hit the wrong button there, and apparently that loses my screen share. That's really dumb. Let's bring that back. Let's back up a little bit here. Viable clan member. I'm not sure if I want you following me. Let's take a look. Now I have to deal with trolls. I really don't like that. Let's take a look at your profile. 2014. 1 second. Have to do some housekeeping here. Oh, it looked like you might have had some stuff on the homepage. About. Okay. Well, I guess we'll just continue on at this point. But if I see anything remotely racist out of that person, then they're getting banned. But okay.
Committed to free enterprise.
So we got that part already.
Because they know capitalism is the only way to lift great numbers of people out of poverty. It is true that liberals want government to play a bigger role in the economy than conservatives do. But liberals never opposed capitalism, and they were never for socialism. Opposition to
never for socialism. That is actually debatable. There were times, especially around the time right before the New Deal, that certain members of the Democratic Party, including the governor of Minnesota, were pretty outwardly for socialism. The governor himself declared that Minnesota is a socialist state at that time. Let me see if I can find that quote 1 second. Could this be it? I was just listening to it in an episode of Behind the Insurrection. Let's see if I can find anything about him being a socialist. Okay. So it says he has a semi-socialist philosophy he would retain for the rest of his life. He was part of the IWW. Let's see. This was the. Let me just make sure this was the governor. Yeah, the 22nd governor of Minnesota. Member of the IWW. Had a socialist philosophy. Where is this number 2? Socialist political. He's for a Social Security program. Okay. So the thing that Olson wanted the most was a bill that would have put Minnesota's electric utilities, iron mines, oil fields, grain elevators, and meatpacking plants under state ownership. This is like the state version of nationalization then. But it never saw the light of day as the legislature balked at what they saw as socialism, and Olson insisted was cooperativism. I wish I could find that particular quote, though. Dang. But I can at least find that Behind the Insurrection episode, so you all can hear for yourself. But there were people at a time in the U.S. that were for socialism, who considered themselves Democrats. Okay, here it is, the business plot. I will share that with y'all if it'll let me. It's freaking out. Hold on one second. Ooh. Can even embed it. I wonder if this will even work as a link. We'll find out. Here's the player for it, though. Yeah, we do have trolls sometimes, James. It used to be a lot more often, but I think they either got bored or I banned enough of them that they just aren't as much trolling this sort of thing. But there is a link to the player for the iHeart radio app, so you can listen to the Behind the Insurrection episode where it mentioned the governor of Minnesota, who was part of the Democratic Party, talking about how the Midwest was a socialist state. He was very much for the New Deal as well, though. But anyway, to say that they were all opposed to socialism, I don't think is quite true. I think a lot. Link showed up. Sweet. Thank you, James. I think a lot of Democrats, at least on the progressive end of it, would be just fine with socialism. I think that a lot of them are held back because of ideas of capitalist realism, the idea that this is what we have right now, which that much of it is true. What we have right now, the most widespread, pervasive, powerful system in the world right now is still capitalism. So maybe they just don't think that it will happen within their lifetime. These would be the sort of people that follow people like Destiny. I've heard Destiny say this sort of thing a number of times, where he's like, yeah, I don't even want to consider these ideas because I don't see them as realistic in my lifetime. We're never going to reach them. But overall, he seems to be at least okay with certain socialist ideas, especially things like worker cooperatives and stuff like that. So yeah, I wouldn't really say that Prager is right on this point either. And again, socialism has become one of those terms that is so nebulous in the United States that it's hard to even know what people mean. He has certainly not defined what socialism is in all of this. I'll be interested to find out if he actually does by the end of the video, but I kind of doubt it, because it's much easier to just vaguely gesture at things and say that thing is scary, so don't be fooled by anything that comes out of it. It only wants to hurt you. Much easier to do that than to actually make a principled argument.
Capitalism and advocacy of socialism are left-wing values.
Again, most of that's for the most part true. If you're on the left, you want some form of socialism. And socialism, I would define as a pretty big tent thing. It includes anarchism. It includes communism. It includes, just like very basic market socialism. But when it comes down to it, socialism is defined as the workers owning the means of production, either directly, as in the workers of any particular business, making all the major decisions democratically, however that looks, whether that's a cooperative form, whether that's locally controlled by a municipality, whether it's just people loosely getting together into a syndicate and voluntarily combining their labor to achieve a goal, kind of like what we do on Left Signal Boost TV. That could be looked at as a kind of a syndicate. We don't owe each other anything. Any of us can leave at any time. There's no employment contract. We don't really deal with things like elections or anything, but we are contributing our labor each to the furtherment of each of our goals. We combine our audiences, we combine our efforts to advertise, that sort of thing. So still, that would be the workers owning the means of production. And then there's more of like a state socialism, where workers have control, either directly or indirectly, of the government through representatives that ideally are recallable and accountable to the people at any given time. And then the state directs economic activity and distributes resources. But that's still the workers owning the means of production. That's the thing that's common between all, I would say, all of the left philosophies. I would think even a anarcho-primitivist system would fit within that. Although I've studied that so little because it just doesn't interest me that I could be wrong. It maybe that would fall outside, because I've heard some things about some very traditional ideas of gender roles and control and stuff like that amongst some anarcho-primitivists. So that might be, but I would doubt it. I'm guessing that if I looked into it enough, I would find some commonalities between that and every other form of socialism. But really, that's all that socialism is: the workers owning the means of production. It's not some big, scary, iron-fisted, dictatorial, top-down system. It may have shaken out somewhat that way in certain circumstances when certain areas have uh, had revolutions and branded themselves as communist or socialist. But that's not how that wouldn't meet the threshold of actually being a socialist state, because that's all it is: workers owning the means of production instead of one person directing an entire business to their own whims and making all the decisions on compensation and employment terms and stuff like that pretty unilaterally.
3, nationalism. Liberals believe in the nation state, whether that nation is the United States, Brazil, or France. But because the left divides the world by class rather than by national identity, the left has always opposed nationalism.
That's not what nationalism is, though. Nationalism is not just dividing the world into nation states. That's ridiculous. Okay, we're gonna use a basic definition to debunk this one. America is scary. You're right, James. But let's look up a basic definition of nationalism. So there's two main definitions: identification with one's own nation and support of its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment to the interests of other nations, or advocacy or support for the political independence of a particular nation of people. So in that case, nation is not a political boundary. It is more often some sort of ethnic or cultural designation that separates it from the national boundaries that it finds itself within. Neither of those is just saying we should have nations. That's bizarre. The USSR was a nation state. So is China. So is Vietnam. So is Cuba. Those are all nation states. Rojava is not a nation state, but it is a nation. They want independence from Syria. Same with the EZLN in Mexico. They are a nation. They're not a nation state. But I would assume that if they could get their own borders and complete independence, they would want that too. So that's a very bizarre way of defining things, whether you want a nation or not. Maybe he'll explain this. Maybe it's an open borders thing that he's having a point of contention
So,
with.
while liberals have always wanted to protect American sovereignty and borders, the left is for open borders.
Okay, so it is an open borders thing. Yeah, I suppose not all strains of liberal or of leftism would equally want open borders. I suppose. But then again, I don't know that all liberals would be opposed to open borders either. Like, I think it comes down to whether or not you think people should be able to live wherever they feel like or not. And whether any nation state should have any accountability to the rest of the world or just do what they please as an empire does. I don't see that as necessarily even a left liberal divide at all. Because I'm sure there are people on the left that very much would want every nation to have sovereignty, strict border control, that sort of thing, in order to keep out would-be destroyers of the socialist or communist state. But that's a little bit different. That's for a different reason than just, we want the right to do whatever we please and treat the world however we please. It's such a bizarre thing too, because this border here, it's not as though it just happened. It was through swindling and murdering and moving and relocating the native peoples and purchasing from other empires that they themselves had no business owning it or calling themselves the owner of it in the first place. So the idea that we should have just sovereign borders and these should just be the iron thing forever. Well, obviously, conservatives wouldn't have believed that as westward expansion was happening either. So it's hard to make sense of where Dennis is coming from. I guess that's the point. Don't think too hard, just believe what I say. But yeah, in general, I think open borders are a good thing. People should be able to move as they please. That's not to say that there should never be any sort of check for people coming into the country or out of the country, but it should be as minimal as possible. And it should have nothing to do with your economic productivity potential. It should have nothing to do with, I mean, at most, you can make an argument for keeping out people that have certain criminal records. But even then, that's kind of like a pre-crime sort of a thing where you're saying, oh, you got a record, so you're definitely going to commit crimes in this country. So even then, that's a bit dubious. But yeah, refugees should be able to come in. We should be the world leader if we are truly the vision of freedom and liberty, as Dennis seems to think. Then if we're keeping out everyone who wants to be a part of that, or just taking in a very select few based on our own benefits, well, I mean, that's definitely not having liberty and freedom being the guiding principle. It is, unless you think that liberty and freedom are only gained at the expense of exclusion and denial of freedom. That's kind of a really bizarre and negative way to look at freedom in the first place. So yeah, I don't know where he's going with this.
When the writers of Superman were liberals, Superman was a proud American whose very motto was truth, justice, and the American way.
Why is he bringing Superman into this? How is this even supposed to be an argument? Superman? A fictional comic book character. Okay.
But that all changed a few years ago when left-wing writers took over the comic strip and had Superman renounce his American citizenship to be a citizen of the world.
Oh God, the horror. An alien from a faraway galaxy with superpowers and the ability to, or a desire to help fellow men, decides to help the entire world instead of just America. All the horror. This is really supposed to be the boogeyman that he's so scared of. Okay, moving on.
The left has contempt for nationalism, seeing it as the road to fascism.
Because when it's a white nationalism, when it's a nationalism that becomes very xenophobic, very jingoistic, does not care about the fate of the rest of the world, thinks it can be the world police and launch coups, manipulate elections, meddle in any way conceivable, as long as it's all on foreign soil, then that's not good. That's not something that we should want. But that is something that is very common to the sort of nationalism that is, that the right gravitates towards. That it ends up becoming an ethno-nationalism, one that believes in like white supremacy and that everyone else is impure and can only bring our country down, or diseased or dirty or whatever. These are common ways that they describe everybody else. So yeah, that's bad. That's not good. I don't know why you would ever be proud of that, or ever think that that doesn't lead to fascism, because that's pretty dang close, to be honest. That basically is fascism, except for you're not quite acting on it as much as you could be. It has to be, behind the scenes. It has to be indirect. It has to be doing things like, tying school funding to a school district's tax base, so that poor districts, which tend to be non-white districts, have poorer schools and hence poorer outcomes and less social mobility and all the other things that come from poor education. That's the kind of fascism that just being nationalistic does tend to lead to. So if they're out and out, it would be these would be things like Jim Crow, where it's actually written into law. There wasn't much difference between Jim Crow United States and a fascist regime, in fact. I guess the only difference would be there was no active campaign of extermination. But geez, that's a pretty that's a pretty low bar, a pretty insignificant separation, it seems. Seems like one could become the other pretty quickly. So yeah, nationalism sucks in terms of the nationalism that the right favors. National liberation, on the other hand, could be a beneficial thing. But that's a lot more up for a debate than what he's talking about.
Better that we should all be citizens of the world.
What's wrong with being a citizen of the world? What's wrong with caring about other people in the world?
In a world without borders. 4.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Unironically that. Why shouldn't we be citizens of the world in a world without borders? Why wouldn't we want to care about fellow human beings and their plight? How is I like, and he's leaving it up for interpretation. He never actually quite says the thing. He never quite gets you to the conclusion he wants you to draw. He just gets you almost there and just hopes that you'll take that next leap and say, well, I don't want to be a citizen of the world. Screw that. But he never said, he doesn't make quite the full argument. Yeah, well, anyway,
4.
moving on.
View of America. Liberals have always venerated America. Watch American films from the 1930s through the 1950s, and you will be watching overtly patriotic, America-celebrating films.
Why do you think that might be, Dennis? What was happening in the 1930s through the 1950s? There wasn't, like, say, the war to end all wars going on around that time, followed by a war against a rising communist power. That couldn't be why there was ultra nationalism and patriotic sort of movies that celebrated America. Like, that's the other thing. When does he ever define what it is to be American? Is it just that you live in the United States to him, or are there other values that go along with it? He kind of leaves that open to your interpretation. Again, that's that little bit of sleight of hand that he does, that he hopes that just by gesturing vaguely, that you'll come to the conclusion that those people are un-American. I would assume that he would think that liberals are un-American, certainly leftists, even if they are American citizens. So anyway, this kind of Leave It to Beaver era where it was almost entirely white, cis, straight men and sometimes a few women on TV, and we just followed them through their lives. There was no other representation at all. Pointing to that too as like the most overtly American time pretty much tells on himself as to what he believes true Americans are and look like and act like. Anyway, let's move on.
Virtually all produced, directed, and acted by liberals. Liberals were quite
Yeah, is Merrick un-American now? Yeah.
aware of America's
question.
imperfections, but they agreed with Abraham Lincoln that America
Wait, does that imply that conservatives are unaware of America's imperfections? I mean, that's true, but I wouldn't expect him to actually say that. Interesting.
is the last best hope of Earth.
Oh. Now's the part I'm almost certain he's going to remind everybody that Abraham Lincoln was in fact a Republican, as though the civil rights era didn't divide the country so much that all the Dixiecrats left the Democratic Party and joined the Republicans and made it the new conservative party. I'm sure he'll just sweep that under the rug.
The left, however, believes the left is the last best hope of Earth and regards America as racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, violent, and imperialistic.
I mean, it is all those things. All of those things are pretty prevalent in American society throughout its founding up until now. It's not hard to find racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, violence, and imperialism. Right now, we're acting as world police. I mean, this was a video from 5 years ago, but still, we were acting as world police back then. We have bases in how many countries? Let's find out. How many countries have U.S. bases? Let's find that number. There we go. How many countries have U.S. military bases? 80 nations around the world, in which there are spread out some 750 American military facilities that are open right now. But we're not imperialistic, are we? We conquered most of North America by genociding actively or by coincidence and relocating the native populations. But we're not imperialistic. We're not colonial either. We spread our empire literally halfway around the world. We have territories that go all the way till Guam, Hawaii, American Samoa, some more well-known and lesser well-known places around the world that are U.S. territories. Not for no reason, because America is an empire. It is. It has routinely launched coups in especially in South America, Central and South America. We've been absolutely brutal to any whiff of a left-wing movement, and we coup their country almost immediately. We tried to do that with Cuba several times. I mean, there was the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was the well, it was a very feeble effort, was our strongest effort to reconquer what had been lost. But before the Cuban Revolution, it was a capitalist, U.S. imperialist dominated country. There were mobsters who ran casinos down there. There were wealthy sugar plantation owners from the states that owned most of the land that eventually was given back to the people. We have a really terrible history of meddling in all the world's affairs for our own economic prosperity. We just got out of Iraq, which we had been in for 20 years, which we were still right in the middle of when this video was made. We invaded, I'm sorry, Afghanistan. We also invaded Iraq and occupied them for quite some time. We routinely invade other countries with our military. We kill civilians all the time around the world. There's been very few years where the U.S. hasn't been bombing and shooting people around the world since, I don't even know how far back that would stretch. At least as far back as World War I. We're absolutely an imperialist country. We kneel on countries to get better trade deals with our imperial might. Like, what is he talking about? And violent? Yeah, we have more gun deaths than any other country in the world per capita. And I believe absolutely as well, possibly. There may be other more violent places like active war zones and stuff like that. But I would say of stable countries, we probably have the most gun violence in the entire world. And again, violence, yeah, bombing people. I wonder if I can even find an answer to this. But how many years has America not been bombing someone? Let's see. How many years has it not been at war? In our entire 244 years of existence, the United States has been completely peaceful 15 years of 244. Only 15 years with no active military conflicts with somebody in the world. Oh, but yeah, we're a peaceful nation. So yeah, you're right there, Dennis. What the hell is he even on? We're not racist. What have the conservatives been most up in arms about for the entirety of the Biden administration? Has it been helping sick people who are dying of COVID? Now, I think we're probably over 1 million at this point in our country alone. Has it been helping out workers and people that have lost their jobs due to all the economic impacts that COVID has had on us? No. It's been, are they teaching our kids to feel bad about their race? Are they teaching little white boys and girls that they're inherently racist? All the CRT nonsense that they whipped up. That's been their major pushing point. For the entirety of the Biden administration, that's where they think the most important things, those are the most important issues in the world to them, aside from also getting rid of any sort of mandate to take care of the health of your fellow neighbor. But yeah, we're not violent, we're not racist or anything like that. And it's not as though that Democrats as a party are all that much better. They just want to have, more female people of color as drone pilots. They think that representation is the end all be all, when in fact that still leaves the majority of us behind, because that's what capitalism does. It is a pyramid. It has to be, in order to support the people at the top. You have to have every level down has to be more and more people. It's like a food chain, right? The animals at the top are supported by, at the very bottom, the grasses and other plants and stuff like that. And then you have a lot of things that eat those grass. But there's by far the most grass and other plants and green leafy things, right? There has to be, to support the herbivores. There has to be a lot more herbivores to support the carnivores, and capitalism is not any different, because you are just in the food chain. It takes a lot of energy to support every level up you go, because you're always losing some energy, in the transfer. To have higher and higher economic levels, you have to have a lot more people producing below you, because some of that money is lost to maintaining their existence as workers. They have to have some to rent a place to live and to have food and stuff like that. So it can't all go to you, but most of it can. Most of those economic calories can end up at the top. That's how capitalism is, and liberals refuse to see that by and large. But to say that we don't, say that we're not racist, that alone leaves the majority of people of color behind. Even if you have equal even if every single position of power was equally represented, men and women, white and non-white, straight and non-straight, so on and so forth. If there's proportional representation in every single sector of the U.S. economy, that would still leave the most of each of those vulnerable minorities behind, just by the very structure of capitalism. So just that alone, even if no one in the system are themselves racist, there could be no racist actors within that system, as long as they are enacting a system that systematically leaves behind any people, then they are enacting a system that is inherently racist. If most Black people end up getting left behind, the outcome of that system is inherently racist. That is what's known as systemic racism. Boy. Yeah, James was talking about how the U.S. has a very isolationist mentality, and that's what nationalism leads to. It's very isolationist, in a sense, but then also with the U.S., it's both isolationist, but also we'll reach our military into every far corner of the earth so that we can extract as many resources for our business backers, the ones that prop up the campaigns of the powerful politicians as possible. We can win as many trade deals for them, get as many unfair advantages in countries of people that have not had economic opportunity to be more self-determinant and take advantage of their own resources themselves. We can just go in and take advantage of them first before they even have the chance. Okay, let's hear number 5. I think this is the last one.
5. Free speech. No one has been more committed than American liberals to the famous statement, "I wholly disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it."
Oh, another issue where if you thought about it for 5 seconds, you might see that there is no one that is a free speech absolutist.
Will defend to
Let's
the
get it all up
death
on screen.
your right to say it.
Okay. That's not the exact quote anyway. I don't know why he changed the wording of it, but it doesn't matter. It's the same basic thing. I may disagree with what you have to say, but I will defend your right. I will defend to the death your right to say it. It's the enlightened centrist position on free speech, because it ignores what the effect of that speech could be. If that speech is inciting violence, if that speech is smearing someone's character in a slanderous or a libelous way, ruining someone just because you're angry at them or because you dislike them for immutable characteristics, that sort of speech is rightly not protected. We could even go further. We could include forms of hate speech in that category. Now, legally, that's not the case in the U.S., but there's a case to be made for it at the very least. The idea that by whipping up racial animosity, xenophobia, even if it's not directed towards people, and even if there's no specific call to action, if the effect is, really terrible outcomes for those minority groups that you are targeting, that speech has a direct deleterious effect on all of those people's right to that same speech or same right to speech. And this is something that always has to be kept in mind, is the balancing principle. The idea that for someone to have a right, if that is a right that is supposed to be given to everybody, then their absolute right to do or say any certain thing has to end where it starts infringing on everyone else's right to do the same. So if you spread medical misinformation and it ends up getting people killed, you should not be able to keep spreading that medical misinformation. You're taking advantage of people's confidence in a way that silences them completely if it results in their death. So again, there has to be limits to free speech, and that's all that leftists ever point out. You know, it's not as though they're saying no one should ever have the right to have a bad opinion or necessarily even a bigoted opinion, as long as it is not affecting others' rights to other people's ability to exercise that same right. This is one of the big divides between left and right in absolute terms, is that the left recognizes that rights must be balanced in order for them to be the most good for the most people. The right focuses only on absolute rights. My absolute right, you know, from 0 being absolutely no right to do it to 100%, I can do whatever the hell I want in a certain case. And if that is diminished at all, then they start getting up in arms about it. It's like the mask mandate. I should have the absolute right to not wear a mask. Now, in general times, that's true. But in times where you have a greater likelihood of spreading a deadly disease to other people, at that point, your right to do whatever you want is infringing on other people's rights to do the same. Because if you give someone a disease and they die from it, they no longer have rights anymore at all. That's the end of their rights. So that seems like a reasonable place to set that balance. In times of pandemic where you have communicable disease, there should be some restrictions in the name of the greater good of public health, because protecting public health overall gives the most rights for the most people. Protecting individual rights at the expense of public health does the opposite.
But the left is leading the first widespread suppression of free speech in modern American history. From the universities.
Oh, you raise a good question there, James. Is violating free speech and fact-checking only certain people the same thing? That depends. Again, we should apply the principle of balancing rights. If you're only fact-checking certain people, why is that? Is that because certain points of view or certain types of people tend to hold a lot of points of view that might be dangerous to the health or well-being of other people if they were to follow the advice from it? In that case, putting on fact-checking, like, you know, COVID misinformation, stuff like that, I think that's okay. If you're only fact-checking someone because they are conservative and you're letting more liberal or leftist people off the hook completely, then again, the principle is out of balance. Assuming that their conservative opinions are not having an effect on other people's right to free speech either. So what do you mean they only seem to do it to selective people? I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. Is this like Facebook fact checking? They only seem to fact check certain people or certain types of statements? Because another thing that's at play there with Facebook is it's being done by an algorithm. So in a lot of cases, there may never have even been a human set of eyes on it to make any sort of decision about whether information is false or not. So it's going to get a lot of stuff wrong just because there cannot be enough people working at Facebook to monitor all the content at the same time. That's why they rely on algorithms. So I wonder what you mean by they only seem to do it to selective people, because that does happen too. And even well, I shouldn't say even. It shouldn't be a surprise that Democrats limit the freedom of leftists quite a lot. Look at what they did to 2 rounds of the Bernie Sanders campaign. They smeared him. They rallied around their preferred candidate at the expense of him. They did not play fair by allowing him to be on their ticket. So there's that example. There's also let's see. During the last presidential election, in a number of states, they got the Green Party removed from the ballot through, I guess, illegal means. Really, they basically raised a big stink and got any sort of competitor to the left side of the ballot thrown off. They got banned. So James, you say you know people that got banned for reshare of content, and the original didn't exist, and the original didn't get banned. Yeah, see, oh, that's a whole other can of worms. I mean, that is somewhat what he's alluding to here with this idea of free speech. It's the idea that some people are getting kicked off platforms, and again, they're not getting kicked off these platforms for free speech. They're getting kicked off platforms primarily for violations of terms of service. So when you sign up for a company, you agree to a certain set of guidelines. For better or worse, you may disagree with those guidelines, but still, because they're a private company, they're allowed to determine their terms of service. And there's an argument to be made that these big platforms constitute a public good. It would be akin to like the public square, a place where everyone can go and give their opinions. And so there should be more leniency given to people's speech, and you should either regulate it more through the government. The government should regulate the sort of speech that is allowed to be taken down or not, or we should just have we should just nationalize these social media companies. There's definitely downsides to any of those strategies, not least of which is if you want the government to start examining much more closely everything that happens on social media, you're giving them a lot of power, for one thing. You're giving the government a lot of power. And Facebook, probably the worst thing they can do to you is kick you off the platform. I mean, I suppose there's cases where they could collude with the government, but it still would be the government doing things like surveillance and catching criminals thereafter and stuff like that. But if you want the government to start examining everything that happens on a Facebook-like platform, now we're talking about legal consequences, not just deplatforming. Now slander and libel come into play a lot more, especially when you're yelling really terrible things at public figures, as it appears Twitter was primarily made for that purpose, just yelling at people you dislike, and saying horrible, terrible things to them. So now you would have the government looking into these claims. You would have people seeking legal recourse. I don't know if that would be any better or not. It's hard to know. I don't think there's an easy answer with the way that these things should be regulated, or whether they should be nationalized. Well, we have to be really careful if we want to invite the government in to start being the referee on this sort of thing, more than they already are. So James says if I and Rob said the same thing and you got banned for 2 weeks and Rob didn't have anything, is that fair? Probably not. Yeah, probably not. It's probably, I mean, I'm sure there are those cases where like someone who has routinely violated terms of service, this is their last warning. Yeah, that could be just it for them. And the other person, maybe this is their, whoops, what did I do there? The other person, perhaps this is their first violation. I mean, there's a lot that could go on behind the scenes, or it could be just a lot of people mass flagging stuff, because that's already a problem with various social media platforms. Is just mass flagging by malicious actors, basically getting your channel taken down on YouTube, getting you banned off Twitch, getting you taken off other platforms in general. So that's a problem. But again, if you want the government to solve that instead of a private company, it might have better results, but it might not. It might not. So you say you want to not ban anyone and leave people alone. Government doesn't need to be involved. They need to be severely decreased to begin with. Okay, but then you're just giving up control completely to these very large corporations to make those decisions for you. if you have a platform where no one can be banned for anything, no matter how egregious or illegal the things that they do are, that's how you get to things like 4chan and 8chan, where, surprise, surprise, a lot of people share sexual assault stuff, especially with minors. You have the most horrific racists all congregating together, people that have been banned off every other platform because they simply cannot get along with other people and not threaten them. You have people doxing one another. You have all kinds of really terrible things if you just throw the doors open and say no one can get banned for any reason. That's, I mean, that sounds like just absolute chaos. And a lot of really bad stuff can thrive in that sort of environment. So I would be very wary about doing things that way. So it's fine if you want to have the government to back off from regulating social media companies, but then again, you're allowing speech to be regulated through the terms of service contracts, and those are kind of up to the whims of what those platforms want to have, and sometimes that's going to be based on things like legal liability. No company wants to be sued for uh, platforming illegal things. So of course those things are going to be taken off. And sometimes that's just going to be up to the corporate culture of a particular place. Like we just really, you could Facebook, whoever's in charge of setting Facebook standards could get together and say, we just really don't like racists. We want to make the world a better place by reducing racist speech. And they could set up a series of standards based on that. And then that's it. You got to follow the TOS. TOS is either going to be in the hands of a large corporation or a government. Perhaps there's a way to completely decentralize the process and have it be based on community ideas, community consensus, that sort of thing. But I don't know exactly how that would work. That's beyond the realm of what I have seen before. And it's kind of hard to imagine how that would work with a large centralized platform such as a Facebook or a Twitter or something like that. Yeah. I mean, in general, you're right, James. People should be able to say what they want, including things that are mean or unkind or um, maybe even to a certain extent come from a I don't know, I guess a bigoted place. But you still have to draw some lines somewhere. Being just mean, if you have like the entire internet dogpiling you, can turn into harassment. Saying gross, weird things with no ability to block or ban a person from being able to say that to you can also be harassment. Um, Creating a culture of bigotry because you're allowed to say and do whatever you want can have bad effects. And we should, in all of this, really what should guide us is what is the effect? If we really believe in free speech, we should want the most free speech for the most people. So we should really be examining what has a chilling effect on free speech, what makes people feel unsafe or actually be unsafe, and we should use those standards to guide what should be or should not be allowed. And at that point, right? So see, let me just finish that. But at that point, um, you know, I think we should have a set of standards that we can agree to that's reasonable, that does the most to uphold free speech for as many people as possible. At the very least, you gotta get rid of the speech that directly harms other people, harassment, credible threats, um, causing mass panic, causing medical misinformation that people might use, might take in good faith and then hurt themselves with. These things got to be curtailed, at the very least, and those are at the fringes. But yeah, just calling people names, sure, in isolated or infrequent incidents, probably doesn't have much of an effect. You call me a bad name, people come in here and call me all sorts of things, and it has not stopped me from streaming one bit. So yeah, those sorts of things should be fine. You shouldn't be able to try and get me banned because I have a different opinion. If my opinion has no effect on you whatsoever, that's too bad. I think those are reasonable standards to follow. But to make it out as though Dennis Prager does, as though it's just a cut and dry issue of free speech or not, that's ridiculous. There's always more factors that you have to look at than just, can I say a thing or can I not? But again, this is how the right tends to view rights. What is my absolute right to do a thing? If it is diminished in any way, that bad. So I shouldn't be regulated in that way by anybody. But it doesn't take more than a couple seconds of thinking about what that could lead to. I mean, if you really want to, go check out 4chan or 8chan. See where free speech absolutism gets you. It is not a pleasant or pretty or welcoming place. It is where the worst sorts of people tend to gather, and it often leads to real consequences. They took down the guy that made 8chan the moment that he found out about the Christchurch shooter and how that had all been planned, and I think it was even live streamed to 8chan. He realized the error of free speech absolutism. Let's finish up this video because I need to be off now.
To the tech companies that govern the internet, to almost every other institution and place of work. Of course, the left claims to only oppose hate speech. But putting aside the fact that the left deems hate speech anything it differs.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. There may be a small collection of very vocal left Twitter people who, yeah, will try and ban and cancel and have consequences for anyone who differs with their opinion, even an iota. But this does not represent the left in any real or broader way. That's ridiculous.
With protecting what you or I might consider hate speech is the entire point of free speech.
That's the entire point, protecting hate speech? Well, I guess now we know Dennis's true colors. We need to protect speech so people can say hateful and nasty things. What a noble goal that is.
6. Western civilization. Liberals have always championed and sought to protect Western civilization. Liberals celebrate the West's unique moral, philosophical, artistic, musical, and literary achievements, and have taught them at virtually every university.
See, this is Western chauvinism. This is saying that the West, which has never been well defined, he's obviously not going to define that any more than we have art and music and literature traditions. Does that include Greece? Because Greeks were not always even considered white. Does that include Italy? Not always considered part of the West or the white race. Does that include Eastern Europe or Russia? Or I mean, the West is not a thing that can really even be defined. But still, they want to have this Western chauvinist, which they believe their collective culture, which is again an amalgam of all sorts of different cultures throughout time and space, is somehow superior to every other culture that has ever existed or exists now. And other than the fact that the so-called West at various times has been more technologically advanced, that even that hasn't always been true. There was the Dark Ages where the Near East and Africa surpassed the West. There was the ancient times. The pyramids were the tallest structure until very recent history. So for thousands of years, stood as the tallest structure in the world. There have been various civilizations throughout time and space that have surpassed the West, but those all get swept aside because the West, the so-called West, is on top. And most of what the West tends to mean to people like Dennis is the English-speaking European and former British Empire countries. To him, that tends to be what the West is. And then Greek antiquity, but we'll just, we'll brush aside the fact that they don't speak English, and never had that as their dominant language, but for some reason still claim that just for that part of it. It's just a proxy for racism, basically. It's to say that the white people have come up with the best things throughout history. They've stood the test of time, and they should be venerated and upheld above everybody else. This is where the idea of Western exceptionalism, Western chauvinism, American exceptionalism, all these ideas spring from that basic white supremacist idea.
The most revered liberal in American political history, President Franklin Roosevelt, often cited the need to protect Western civilization and even Christian civilization.
Who cares? Who cares if Roosevelt said that? I certainly don't. His New Deal was good and is objectively a good thing, and it cemented a kind of progress for the next few generations until the 1980s. But it could have been better. We almost shifted into a socialist country, but that was the grand bargain. To stave off socialism was to put people to work through worker programs, to strengthen unions, and these sorts of programs that came out through the New Deal. But I don't care what he thought about Western civilization. I do not care what he thought about Western civilization one bit. It doesn't matter. He's not even alive today, of course. He has very little bearing on, or those opinions have very little bearing on my life today. So, you could pick out any person from history, and they probably had some good opinions at some time in their life, and they probably had some really atrocious opinions at times of their life. Does that mean we just follow everything because, even if they overall did good for the world, do we just follow everything that they thought? Gandhi had some really bad opinions about Africans. Mother Teresa was very racist towards the Indians that she helped. You could look at any figure that has been venerated, and at some point they probably had a bad opinion, or opinion that is not worth following to this day. Martin Luther King Jr. was a devout Christian. That doesn't mean that I should follow Christianity just because he did. He did wonderful things, but I really don't care about his opinions much on Christianity, because I don't find that a compelling narrative to follow. So who cares what FDR said about Christian civilization or Western civilization? That makes no difference to me at all. He also lived in a time of Jim Crow separation. So really, who cares? It's like people that cite the founding fathers as though any sort of good they did means we should venerate them completely and follow. Oh, what would the founding fathers have done? Well, the founding fathers thought it was just cool to own slaves. Most of them did. The founding fathers thought women shouldn't vote. They didn't even think that free white men that didn't have property should vote. They thought a lot of really backwards, dumb things. So it doesn't really matter what these figures of history thought was worth venerating. It has absolutely no bearing on whether or not it actually is a good thing. This is kind of an appeal to authority. It's, this person was a great person. This person said a thing that has nothing to do with why they were a great person or why they were venerated. And so therefore they're right about this thing too. No bearing. You can be a Jordan Peterson and probably have some good ideas about psychology, have some pretty obvious but not harmful ideas about self-help, and still have garbage political opinions. These are not mutually exclusive things. It would be like someone in the future looking back at Jordan Peterson and saying, well, the 12 rules for life were a pretty good guide and they helped me out quite a bit. So I think CRT is a cultural Marxist plot. Like these are disconnected things. Just because a person is great in one way doesn't mean they're great in all ways. That's a dumb, dumb argument.
Yet when President Donald Trump spoke of the need to protect Western civilization in a speech in Warsaw, the left-wing media, also known as the mainstream media, denounced him.
Also known as the mainstream media, as though Fox News is not mainstream. This is so dishonest. It's laughable. I need to.
They argue that Western
Hurry up
civilization
here.
is no better than any other, and that Western civilization is just a euphemism for white supremacy.
It often is, and that's exactly how Dennis Prager is using it. We have done so many wonderful things. All the best things in the world were done by Western civilization, which just happens to be a lot of white people. Yeah, Western civilization is not inherently better than any other civilization. And Western civilization shouldn't be taken as an entire monolith because it's never been an entire monolith. It's been a lot of different contributions from a lot of different times and places and different sorts of people that have intermixed and mingled with all sorts of other people throughout history. So to treat it all as one equal body of thought that we have to wholly accept or wholly reject is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. We can want things like more social equality. That often is a thing that is venerated by Western civilizations. Is this march towards better social equality, more power sharing, and stuff like that. That doesn't mean that we should also say that classical Greek antiquity is the height of art, and there's nothing else that we should ever consider, or that the literature of 18th century poets is in the West was inherently better than people coming from different traditions at that same time or today. That's just these are these are mutually exclusive things, or they can be mutually exclusive things. They don't have to be connected in any way. We can like one thing and not like another thing. We can pick and choose what we like about various cultural ideas and various philosophies. It's not an all or nothing proposition, and it never should be. That's just a ridiculous way to think, and it's a ridiculous way to conceive of your own ideas and values.
So then, if liberalism and leftism are so different, why don't liberals oppose the left? In a nutshell, because they have been taught.
They do constantly. Look what has happened with the Squad and how they've been rendered basically impotent by Nancy Pelosi and other conservatives, even more conservative people in their own party. The left hates, or the liberals hate the left a lot more than they hate conservatives a lot of the time, because conservatives still like capitalism, and so do the liberals. But the left wants to get beyond that.
All their lives to fear the right.
Oh, yeah.
But as one of the best-known liberals in America, Harvard Law School professor Alan Dershowitz said, as a liberal, as an American, and as a Jew, I far more fear the left than the right. Dear liberals.
So you just contradicted yourself within a couple of sentences. Why don't the liberals hate the left more than the right? Oh, wait a minute. They don't. They fear the left more than the right. What? You just completely undermined your own point. But I guess if you're this far on board with Dennis Prager, then you're just gonna keep that cognitive dissonance, and it's not gonna bother you.
Conservatives are not your enemy. The left is. I'm Dennis Prager.
Because they're different. Like, you didn't even give a reason why any of that is wrong. You said a lot of things that the left supposedly believe in, but you didn't say why any of it is inherently bad or wrong or a misunderstanding of the way things should be or anything. It's this constant vague gesturing and hoping that you'll just adopt his point by his tone and the things that he infers but doesn't quite say. It's just incredibly lazy analysis and philosophy. But it's still somewhat popular. Dershowitz. Yeah, I don't I don't think I could give you a single quote from Alan Dershowitz, but he's definitely not someone that I follow or really have any reason to have any reason to follow or dig more into the things that he thinks about. But whatever. So there's PragerU. That's all I'm going to do for tonight. I do have to wrap this up because I've gone over once again. Let's see if there's anyone on. Who I should raid. I think probably I don't have that many people watching right now, so I may just close it out. Yeah, I only got a couple people on right now. Maybe we'll just close it out. So we'll shout out somebody, and then we'll close the stream. We won't go through the whole raid situation. Oh boy. You know what? I see that Hannah is doing Sovereign Citizen Sunday, and that's always a good time. Why did you do that? Ay, ay, ay. So 1 second, and I will get you. Is Hannah still going, or did she get off? Is that why it didn't work? Let's see now. Oh, maybe Hannah has finished now. Never mind. I guess she's not on. Let's see who's on right now. Somebody you can go check out on your own. Yeah. Let's shout out Chapo Trap House. I've been enjoying their Matt Christman's coverage of The Dawn of Everything. He's been doing a book club where he goes through the chapters of The Dawn of Everything little by little and analyzes them. It's been very good. So yeah, go check out those guys. Hannah just went offline. That's why it didn't work. Cool. Well, I'm not going to raid, but I will just give you the link for Chapo Trap House because I always like to shout out somebody on the stream. Go check them out. Pretty good analysis and usually funny, if a bit doomer pilled. But, I don't think they would keep doing what they were doing if they had absolutely no hope of any better sort of society. So anyway, thank you all for joining me. Little bit of a disorganized PragerEwww, but we'll try this again some other time. Maybe we'll pick a different target next time. Man, Dennis Prager, one dumb guy who has way too much of a following. But that's what money can get you. Money and connections. All right, have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow night for some more permaculture design course with Mike Hogue of Transformative Adventures. See you then.